Hi, I'm Railroad Mike. Thanks for tuning in today. Wanted to tell you some stories about my experiences with flag stop service with the Alaska Railroad and my experiences with off-gridders, and kind of explain to you some of the terminology that revolves around the railroad and off-gridders north of Talkeetna, just so you have a better idea and understanding on how our language is and what it's like to live north of Talkeetna. If you've ever seen the TV series Rare Alaska, you may be familiar with off-gridders Jim and Nancy James. Jim and Nancy were regulars on the TV series, and they made appearances throughout the entire run of the series Railroad Alaska. Jim is no longer with us, and Nancy has moved on to Illinois. My friends Rob and Sarah of Curmudge Inn are the owners of Jim and Nancy's old property and compound. They have a YouTube channel that I highly recommend that you check out called Curmudge Inn Alaska. And as a matter of fact, here's a wonderful coffee cup with their design. So give them a check out on YouTube. Be sure to tell them I sent you Curmudge Inn Alaska on YouTube. So today I'm going to be mainly focusing on off-gridders Jim and Nancy James, and explain to you a little bit about them and some of the stories around them and what it's like to get on the train and how to get to and from these remote places. So a little bit about myself as somebody who has this name, Railroad Mike. It was something that somebody gave me years ago as a young man, and it's something that I've gone by ever since. As a young teenager, I used to hang out at the train station and the section house in Talkeetna, and I got to know a lot of great people, from trainmen to track workers to the station people and even off-gridders, some of which these folks I'm still friends with to this day and talk to on a semi-regular basis. So, up the tracks. To kind of explain to you that term, up the tracks, it's anything that's north of Talkeetna. Now, yes, anything north of Talkeetna could also mean Nenana or Fairbanks. And yes, while it is up the tracks, if you're in the Talkeetna area, up the tracks is meaning the area where people live, the off-gridders that rely on the railroad to get to and from their homes. Now, the flag stop service is in a 55-mile stretch that goes from Talkeetna to Hurricane. The railroad is the only means to access these remote cabins and homes and homesteads north of Talkeetna. In the wintertime, the Aurora passenger train that runs on the weekends, as well as 6 days a week throughout March, that is the main way for people to reach their homes to either get in or get out. And in the other parts of the winter months, you have a once-a-month flag stop service called the Hurricane Turn. And this is set up so that at the first part of the month, people can take the Hurricane Turn, go into town on Thursday, and then all day Friday shop and get ready for Saturday to go home. Saturday you would get on a train, and then you would go to your home and get dropped off, and you would do that either once a month or whenever it was necessary for you. In the summertime, it's a little bit easier to get in and out because there is the summer version of the Hurricane Turn. Also, the Hurricane Turn, which runs 5 days a week from Thursday through Monday. Now, when you get north of Talkeetna up the tracks, most of these homes are not directly on the railroad track. And you may have seen, possibly either online or on Rare Alaska, or however you may have seen, if you're familiar with, there are some homesteads that are fairly close to the track, but the majority of them are way off from the track. Some cases there are folks that have to travel several miles to get to their cabins, some not that far, and there's the few that are fairly close to the track where you can see them from the train. So as somebody that would hang out around the railroad and getting to know railroaders and off-gridders, I was fortunate enough to go up the tracks to the Levels, Clyde and Mary. They were also on Railroad Alaska for a few episodes. And I was fortunate enough to go out there and help them with a cabin, or I should say a shed that was being put up. Now, when it can become known that anybody who does good work and is willing to go up the tracks and live this kind of lifestyle, it becomes known that you're somebody that will do that, and sometimes you can gain quite a bit of work from people that live in these places. And while a lot of people can do the work themselves, there are sometimes they just need help, and they may be too far away from their neighbors to ask for any help, or maybe their neighbors aren't around, or there's very different things that happen that would require somebody from Talkeetna or elsewhere to come up and help. So I was somebody that was one of these people that liked to go out on the train to these remote places and do some work for people. In the late fall, early winter of 2008, one of the very few times that I seen Jim James in Talkeetna, approached me, and I'd already met him while riding the Hurricane Turn a couple of times, but mainly it was Nancy that would do the trips to town and back while Jim stayed and made sure that the fire was kept up, and basically was making sure the house was okay. He didn't really like going into town too often, but he did go to town a few times. So this particular time he approached me and asked me if I would like to come out to his place sometime throughout the winter and help him with some chores, some work that he needed accomplished around the place. And I said, for sure, I would like to go do it. And so I did have some scheduling conflicts going on, and I didn't make it out right away. So the first time I came out here was in I believe February of 2009. And as a matter of fact, I'm sitting here in the kitchen of the original cabin of Jim and Nancy James. I'm up here visiting Rob and Sarah at Curmudge Inn, and I'm doing this video right here in the kitchen, in the same chair at the same table that I used to sit at when I was here working for Jim and Nancy. So it's actually very appropriate for me to tell you these stories. So I came up here, and I was here for 1 week, and in that week mostly what I did was firewood. Now a lot of people in Alaska burn firewood, and that's their main source of heat. The more remote you are, the more likely you're burning firewood, because it is difficult to get heating oil, or any sort of fuel out for heating purposes. That's not to say that there isn't any sort of oil heat or propane heat. There is, but it's just more difficult to get. And I'll explain how people get their flammables brought to them here in a little bit. So how it goes for firewood, for all firewood, is you have to cut your trees down and you process your firewood, and it takes a year to have your wood seasoned. Seasoned meaning that it's dry and you can burn it. You can't chop down a live birch tree or spruce tree or any tree in general, split it and throw it into your wood stove without it sizzling, and it's green. So you're actually burning the sap and creating creosote. You're not creating a proper burn. It's not hot. It just doesn't work. So it's a process that happens all the time. where you go out, you chop your firewood, and you put it in the woodshed, and you wait until it's seasoned, and then you can burn it. In most cases, your woodshed could be broken up into two rooms, and these two rooms, you have one side that's going to be seasoned wood, and the other side's going to be green wood. I have the same concept with me. I burn wood mainly. I do have oil heat, but I burn wood mainly, and I have to do the same thing where I have to move my seasoned wood to the front of the shed, and then the back of the shed is going to be the unseasoned wood and where it's going to season. So you're always constantly rotating your wood. Basically, it's a first in, first out type thought process. So, and also at that time, Jim had both of his hands. If you remember on the TV show, he did have a hook hand, and I'll explain to you that story here as we get along. So that week that I was here, we chopped down a bunch of trees, and I processed all the firewood, moved the wood in the woodshed from one side to the other, and I split the wood and stacked it. And that week there wasn't really a whole lot of other things that I did. Mainly it was firewood, and all that was done by hand, other than chopping the trees down and cutting them and hauling them here via snow machine and a freight sled. So the first couple of days, we chopped the trees down and processed them, or at least we bucked them up. And I hauled them over to a point behind the woodshed, or kind of behind the house over here where there's the woodshed, and made a large pile. Once we were done collecting the wood, then started the process of splitting the wood and throwing into the woodshed and then stacking it. And you stack it in such a way so the air moves through and also helps dry out your wood. So it's a real process. It's simple, but there's also a real science to doing this. It's a method to the madness, if you will. Um, when I stayed here, there's a trapper's cabin that's close to the main cabin. And again, I'll mention Rob and Sarah with Curmudge Inn. They have several videos of the original cabin and the trapper's cabin, as well as the other buildings and the new home that are on their channel, Curmudge Inn. And that will kind of give you an idea on where I was here at Jim and Nancy's place. So the trapper's cabin that's next to the main cabin is a genuine trapper's cabin. Low roof, not a standard door, as in you have to duck down to get in, no windows. There was a little stove, but Jim had a large TV and a couple of beds in there. So Jim and Nancy, they had different sleep schedules, and so Jim would sleep in the trapper's cabin with me, or I should say I slept in the same cabin as Jim did, and Nancy would work on her artwork and what have you in the main cabin. And Nancy liked to do a lot of wood carving, and I know she did some other artwork that I don't recall seeing, but she mainly did a lot of wood carving. For those of you that have been to Denali Brewing Company in Talkeetna, the local brewing company in Talkeetna, you may be familiar with their Chuli Stout beer. And if you see the Chuli Stout beer, you'll see this Alaskan sourdough gentleman with the walking stick, and he looks like he could have been out of the gold rush of the 1890s, or somebody that's definitely an old sourdough of Alaska. Now, she actually used Jim as an inspiration. So in a way, Jim lives on through Chuli Stout. So if you go to Denali Brewing Company, either at their Twister Creek pub in downtown Talkeetna, or their brewery tasting room out several miles south of Talkeetna, if you see the gentleman with the Chuli Stout handle on their caps, that's Jim James. So she would do carvings, and she would do her artwork and she would be up all night, and Jim would sleep in the cabin. So naturally, at the end of the working day, whenever that ended, we would have dinner and talk. And Jim told me quite a few stories about their lives in Alaska, how they got here, and their experiences in general. Um, and as well as what it's like to live here year round. And then after, usually we would go to the trapper's cabin and go to sleep. Sometimes we would talk there for a while in the trapper's cabin, sometimes not. But Jim would sleep with the TV on, or at least at this trip he slept with the TV on. And he snored very, very, very loud. He was loud like a freight train. So there were definitely some times where I would wake up and he would be snoring. Now, Jim was an interesting character. He really did not tolerate stupid people. And we all know there's people in the world that may have stupid tendencies and they may not be on the same level as, say, Jim was. So Jim just didn't tolerate stupid people. And he must have had a lot of stupid people in his life because a lot of his stories revolved around stupid people doing stupid things, lack of common sense, getting hurt, whatever like that. And he also had a real temper. And you may have kind of gathered that from the TV series that he had a bit of a temper, and he really did have a hot, hot, hot temper. And sometimes it could be scary if you were on the receiving end of him and his wrath, if he was angry. And that did happen to me a couple of times uh, for whatever reason or another, and we'll get to that. So Jim was also one that carried firearms, and out here in the woods, rightfully so, because you do have a lot of wildlife. You have bears, you have moose, you have wolves, you have coyotes, you have things out here that can kill you. We may not have black widow spiders or brown recluse spiders, despite what people say. We don't have like the poisonous stuff, but we do have big animals that can kill you. And a grizzly bear can weigh upwards to 1,800 pounds and can stand 7, 8 feet tall, if not taller. There have been cases where there's been taller bears when they stand on their hind legs. Moose, a bull moose, can reach upwards of 1,500 pounds, if not more. We're talking about something that's the weight of a small car. And a bear can have a paw print or a paw that's like this big, if not bigger, with razor sharp claws. And all they gotta do is do one little swipe and you're dead. A moose can come up and trample you and kick you until you're dead. It could even take just one kick in the right spot and you're dead. So yes, there are animals out here that can kill you. So Jim was one that always carried a firearm. And one of the things that he liked to talk about were all the bears that he had to take care of. And back then, when they first came up here to their property, it was overrun by grizzly bears and black bears. And so he actually had to take care of a lot of bears. I don't know how many bears he ever did put down, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was upwards of 100, maybe more, maybe less. There are a lot of legends in Alaska, and there's a lot of truth to the legends told. So we'll just leave it up to your imagination on how many bears he had to take down. And he was a really good shot too. So Jim would talk about his experiences with bears, and he talked about trapping. Trapping is a way of life out here in various points in Alaska where you go out and you have a trap line and you're either trapping wolves, marten, ermine, and you're using their pelts to either make fur clothing, such as trapper hats, fur hats, winter hats, or gloves, mittens, anything like that. Beaver is also another critter that he would go after and trap as well. And beavers, they may look cute and all that, but they can cause a real nuisance, especially if you have spring-fed creeks, and that's where you get your water from, is from the head of a spring. If the beaver could come in and dam everything up and cause a real mess. So you definitely want to keep track of where the beavers are if they're messing with your water supply, because if they're messing with your water supply, well, then you need to go take care of that. So that first week consisted of doing firewood, some storytelling, and that was pretty much it. You could say it was a little bit on the mild side. Being out here north of Talkeetna, really anywhere in general Alaska where you're off the road system and you're away from any sort of light pollution or noise pollution or anything, it's a totally different experience. Totally different experience. You look at the night sky in the wintertime and you can see everything. And in some cases, you can see, if the conditions are right, you can see the Milky Way. You can also see northern lights on a clear night, given that the conditions are right with solar activity, and the whole sky can be filled with the northern lights. But what can be really interesting, a real trip, is the lack of sound. And the lack of sound could be where you don't hear cars, trucks. You might hear an occasional bush plane flying around, but at night you won't hear any of that at all. You might hear a little bit of a breeze, if that. In some cases, the only thing you hear is the heartbeat in your ears and the sound of your breathing. It's actually really therapeutic. And for me, having those kind of experiences is awesome for me. It's therapy, if you will. It's good for psyche to just go out and you get a good reset. Um, so that first week was, as mentioned, was on the mild side, and I did head back into Talkeetna, and I was going to come back out a little later on and do some more work for Jim, but it didn't happen. And even though you have snow machines and you utilize them throughout the winter months, the snow conditions need to be right in order to truly go everywhere, meaning that the snow has to be a certain depth so you're not hitting trees and obstacles that are down underneath the snowpack. The snowpack has to be firm enough to support your snow machine, whether what size it is and what you're doing with it and all that good stuff. And also the rivers and lakes and creeks, are they frozen so that you can travel across them or what have you? So there's a lot of different variables on where you can go in the wintertime via snow machine. So when it gets later on in the winter, as it starts to warm up, the snow can pack down and it creates a real crust. And as everything packs down, you can pretty much go anywhere with your snow machine without sinking. Of course, if you make a trail and you pack it down and then you let it set up, meaning you make the trail and then the next day after everything is set up, and in some cases sometimes more than a day, you can walk anywhere and not sink through. But as soon as you get off that trail, you could sink down up to your neck in snow, which that has happened, and it's really, really, really difficult to get out of it. So when the snow conditions are right, that's when you want to do your logging, because you'll be able to go to all these other places and cut down your trees or access the deadfall, fresh deadfall, whatever. And you can also rely on the good snow conditions for hauling freight. And so there's other folks that may not rely on the railroad that live in various parts of Alaska, and they have to rely on the rivers being frozen or the snow conditions to be right to haul their freight back and forth. It's a really short season. And once it starts warming up, we have what's called the breakup. And breakup is our spring, essentially. And that means that the snow starts getting rotten, meaning it's melting, it's not supporting anymore. Your ice starts to fall, it starts to rot away, so your rivers start breaking up and opening up and flowing. Your lakes become unstable, and you don't want to be out on any of that. So with that short season, you want to get as much as you can done during that time period. Otherwise, you have to wait a year. And sometimes, depending on the winters, you may not have a lot of snow, and you may have a very short hauling season. And then in other years, you might have a longer, heavier winter, and you're able to do a lot more. So you really can't just go and say, well, it's going to be good next year, and I'm going to haul the same amount of stuff. You may not be able to haul hardly anything, right? Um, so let's talk a little bit about hauling things to off-gridders via the Alaska Railroad. With the flag stop service, whether it be the Aurora or the Hurricane turn trains, you're only allowed to carry so much stuff at one point in time, mostly food and other items like that. You can't bring flammables on board the train, meaning you can't bring gas or diesel or propane or kerosene, anything like that. You have to utilize the Tundra Express service. The Tundra Express is not a train, it's actually a large flatbed semi truck with a boom that has high rail gear attached to it. And high rail is short for highway rail, meaning vehicles are equipped with flanged wheels that utilize hydraulics, and they sit down onto the track, and that's how vehicles, you might see pickup trucks or larger vehicles, that's how they're able to get on the rail and use the rail with the high rail gear. So the Tundra service runs as needed. Historically, they're supposed to be running once a week, but since it is a overtime, volunteer overtime job, sometimes throughout the year, the folks that are driving a Tundra truck, they're not able to deliver every week because maybe there's a bunch of snow, and they're all, for the most part, heavy equipment operators and truck drivers. So when there's a bunch of snow, whether it be in Anchorage or other points, the heavy equipment operators are busy with that, and sometimes they're just not able to bring your supplies out via the Tundra truck. So the Tundra truck will pick up your propane and all your flammables, and they will go to various stops along the railroad, and they will drop off all the flammables. They'll also drop off your building supplies. They will also drop off your four-wheelers, your ATVs, snow machines, anything that's way too large or you're not able to put on the Hurricane or the Aurora trains goes on the Tundra truck. With the flag stop service, it's pretty simple, really. Most of the time, everyone knows everybody, right? So it doesn't take very long for new flag stoppers to become part of the family. The railroad is pretty tight knit anyway, and especially even more tight knit with flag stoppers. You're like one big family. Railroaders have concerns for the off-gridders and vice versa. So, like I said, it's one big family. So when you go to Talkeetna Depot, your coolers and your boxes and everything is labeled with your milepost. 262.2, 2325. You get the point. You have your mileposts, and that's where your trail is. And most of the time, the trainmen know who you are, and they know where your stop is. And in some cases, you might have crews that are not too super familiar, but you still have a list of your stops and what have you. And your items can consist of coolers of food, boxes of what have you, anything like that. They'll go into these large crates, and these are rather large crates. I'm not sure if you would have seen them on Railroad Alaska, the big crates anyway. The smaller crates are the regular luggage crates. I think those made appearances, but the large crates are like the flag stop crates, and sometimes one person can fill up a whole crate. And that's okay. It's anything over that. That's when you're going to need the tundra service, or you need to figure out if you really need to bring all that stuff up at one point in time. And sometimes you'll have a lot of flag stoppers on the train. And that's either because of the time of month. Let's say it's the first part of the month and they're coming back from being in town for a couple of days, or maybe they're resupplying for a long period of time. Sometimes it just works out where you have a lot of flag stoppers utilizing the train. Sometimes you don't have a whole lot. It all really depends. So the what will happen is for the drop-offs, you have your crates with your items in there, and when you get to your stop, you get off the train, and members of the train crew will hand down your items to you, your boxes of food and your coolers, your supplies, and then you have to take your supplies to your home, whether it be with a four-wheeler or with a snow machine and a trailer. And most of these people, it's second nature to them. It's just as it's just the same sort of thought as I'm going to the grocery store. You know, they're just that accustomed to it. And so you'll learn how to do without, and learn how to live within your means, and how to live this sort of lifestyle. So for getting out, you after a while, a lot of people kind of get a routine down of, well, we know when so and so is getting out onto the train, and they kind of look, and sometimes it may be a couple days later than that, or what have you. But everyone's looking out for people flagging a train. For a flag stop, you can wave your hand, or in some cases use like a white towel or a rag as a white flag, and they'll stop the train and pick you up and take you to town. Um, is there phone service? And there's not really phone service out this way. Yes, there is, but it's kind of different. In some cases, you have satellite phones. Since it's 2024, a lot of technology has progressed to where you can have cell service, better cell service in other areas. And there's also Starlink, and Starlink is been very instrumental in connecting more and more off-gridders to the outside world. So if there's any sort of medical issue or what have you, they're able to contact somebody with the railroad and get picked up and get rescued. Um, with Jim and Nancy, that's how they would get to and from town, as they relied on the flag stop train. So I didn't come up until I didn't come up here again until the winter of 2011. And I came up here in 2011 3 times. 2 times for working, and then the third time was, I believe it was April 7th, 2011, and that was a hurricane turn day. And I was only up here for the day to discuss some things with Jim after my last period of working up here. So the second time I came up consisted of doing more firewood and helping Jim around the property. And by this time in 2011, Jim had actually lost his hand due to an accident, and he had a hook for a hand at that point in time, which you would have seen on the TV show. He made his own prosthetics, and he was still able to live his life out here. If you saw on the show, he actually was still riding snow machines, and he was still chopping down trees and living the lifestyle out here, but he utilized eye hooks on everything. For the most part, everything had eye hooks. And if he wasn't able to put an eye hook on everything, he would wrap, say, a handle on a snow machine bar or a four-wheeler. He would wrap something around it until it matched the circumference of his hook. So then it would kind of just sit on there, and he was able to maneuver his snow machine or his four-wheeler. He also was able to do the same sort of concept and cut trees down. And I think actually, if you look on some parts of Rubber Alaska, you can see him cutting up trees, and he really did do that. I never cut trees down. when I was up here working for Jim. He actually really liked doing that. That was something that he wanted to do, but he had a hard time picking up the rounds and processing out the wood. So that week, I think it was February. I think it was in February. I came up and did that week, and he wanted me to come back again, and I had to go back home and resupply myself for the next trip. And at the time, I was a smoker, so I was running out of cigarettes. I needed to get my cigarettes, and I needed to get my clothing and what have you. And so there was a period, I think, of about 3 weeks, thereabouts, of a period in between my next trip up. The next trip up was in March of 2011, which is about this time of year. It's about the middle of March now. This is when the snow conditions are right for hauling, whether it be your firewood or your freight. And so um, that next period of time that I was up here, in a way, I'm going to say Jim kind of kidnapped me. So I was here for a week, and he had a lot going on at that time with other projects besides the firewood. He had a lot going on here besides the firewood. And the Sunday that I was going to be heading back into town, even though I was packed up, Jim had said, "Well, I need you to stay for another week, and we have a lot to do and other things like that." And so he never even fired up the snow machines to go down to the track. Actually, really, it was just one snow machine because I would ride on the freight sled with my bags to and from the track, right? So he didn't even get ready to go, and at that time I was like, "Well, I guess I'm staying here." And it's all part of the story, right? So I said, well, I guess I'm going to stay here another week and get paid for doing all this work. So there was other things that we did besides firewood, right? One of the things that he had a lot of fuel drums delivered via the Tundra truck, and I mentioned about the Tundra truck service and how they bring fuels to folks out here. And when you, for the most part, when you are ordering fuel and paying for it, you want to buy in bulk. And while a 55-gallon drum for some people may be considered bulk, we're talking a lot of barrels. And you got to remember, I haven't been here to this place since 2011. And there's a lot of this I haven't really thought about in depth for a long time. So there are some details that aren't as sharp as they once were. And yesterday, I did a live show with Rob on Curmudge Inn and told a lot of the same stories that I'm telling you here. And it's wonderful because as I'm telling these stories, I'm remembering more and more little details and more little stories about my experiences. So some of the things just aren't so fresh. So I don't remember how many barrels of fuel was delivered. I think they brought it up in 2 different runs in the same day because it was just a mass amount of barrels, as well as other supplies on their truck going to other points north of Talkeetna. And he had gas and diesel. Now, how do you get your power out here? Well, your power runs off of a diesel generator. And they had a big diesel generator in a generator shed that was powered by diesel, and that's how they powered their house. Some folks, they rely on solar and their generator. They have other ways of gaining power for electricity. And electricity out here is a lot different than folks in the city. You have battery banks that store the power. We're not talking like car batteries. We're talking genuine off-grid power systems. And you can look online and kind of get an idea, or on Remember Alaska, you can actually see a little bit of the how folks get their power. Everyone's a little bit different on how they utilize and obtain their power. And Jim used a big generator, and it ran pretty much all the time. And so they did go through quite a bit of fuel. So half of the order of fuel was oil for or diesel for the generator, and the other half was gas. And you need gas for your snow machines, your four-wheelers, your chainsaws. There are some, of course, gas generators. You need to have both of these fuels up here. And of course, propane was what they used to cook with. Um, so when you get a big order like that, it takes a while to get stuff off the track into your compound. And in this case, it's about I believe about a mile long trail through the woods from the track to the compound. And the freight sled that he used hauled one barrel, so it was all one barrel at a time. And in the first episode of Railroad Alaska, in season 1, episode 1, you'll see Jim and Nancy go onto the railroad track with a sled with propane tanks. That was a sled that I used to haul all his fuel barrels up, as well as the firewood that was done. It was heavily used. So that gives you an idea on how he what he used in the wintertime to haul his freight back and forth from a track. And I didn't just haul up all the barrels in one day. It actually took 2 or 3 days, if I remember right, to haul all the barrels up, because there was so many of them. And there's other tasks that needed to be done, such as getting water from the spring down the trail. There was some snow shoveling, obviously firewood. There was all these other chores that needed to be done, so you didn't focus on just the fuel barrel. So it took a while to get everything off the track. And then there was a process of transferring all the fuel into various different drums. And Jim had this method where behind the generator shed, he had just barrels and barrels and barrels and barrels. Some were empty, some were half full, whatever the case may be. And so the way you stacked your barrels up, you had to use this siphon hose, and I had to transfer all of the fuel into different barrels. And that's Rob on his snow machine running around. Anyway, so we had to transfer the fuels into various different drums and have it organized. He had a method to his madness. I don't know if I ever saw that method and understood that madness, but he knew how he wanted it, and it was quite a bit of work. So how did Jim lose his hand? I'm sure that's going to be coming up now, so let's talk about that. Well, in the series Railroad Alaska, Jim talked about how he was pulling a shotgun out of a scabbard, and he had his hand over the muzzle, and it blew off. Somehow the trigger got caught, and it blew his hand off. Well, that's not actually true. I'm going to tell you what he told me and how it happened. There's other stories on how he lost his hand, and we'll just take everything, I guess, with a bit of a grain of salt, because he had various different stories. But I'm going to tell you how he told me, what he told me happened with his hand, with his left hand. So during the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese had a sort of a booby trap where it had a tube and some sort of tripping mechanism, and you had some sort of charge, whether it was a gun shell, like a shotgun shell, or some sort of explosive, and when somebody came by and tripped it, it would blow up, and it would maim the person or kill the person. That was the objective of that booby trap. And there's also another sort of gun called a zip gun, and a zip gun is a one-time use gun where you have like a tube, say a tube, and then you would have some sort of maybe a rubber band and a nail, and it was a one-time use. So you would have your tube, say, we'll use this pin for an example, right? So you would have this tube that was your barrel. You would have a round in there, and then you would have some sort of firing mechanism, like I said, a nail and a rubber band, and you would pull it back and let it go, and it would shoot the round off. So he wanted to create some sort of mashup device with a zip gun and a booby trap. Why did he want to do that? Well, I mentioned beavers damming up water sources and what have you, and he had a beaver problem, and he was trying to trap the beavers and get rid of the beavers because it was messing up their water supply, and you need to have water, so you need to take care of the critters that are wrecking the water supply. So he was trying to set up this trap, and it utilized some sort of flap mechanism, and on the bottom, underneath this flap mechanism that he had in there, he had a plate and a nail, or some sort of firing pin, if you will. The shotgun round, sat on top of the flap, and the theory is when a beaver comes up and obviously there was some sort of bait, whether it was meat or whatever, I don't know exactly what, but you have some sort of bait, then the beaver would come up and start eating it, trip the flap, the round drops down onto the nail or the firing pin, if you will, and it fires that round off and it kills the beaver. Well, what happened was Jim had his hand over the trap, and he was trying to set it, and something happened, and his shirt caught the flap, and the round went off, the shotgun round with buckshot, and it blew his hand. He didn't lose his whole hand right there, but it was pretty well shot off. And he got back to the cabin here, and he and Nancy had to go down to the track, and thankfully there was a section truck, a maintenance way truck, that happened to be coming up on them not long after they got to the track, and picked them up and brought them into Talkeetna, and the foreman had called the paramedics, and he got taken to the hospital in Wasilla, and they had to amputate the rest of his hand and partway up his arm, and you'd actually see that on River Alaska, his stump. And it took that actually happened that happened later on in 2009. That happened after I'd been up here the first time. So he had about a year and a half with his prosthetic by the time I came back up here. And he was still in a lot of pain. He still had some buckshot that was still in his arm that was bubbling up, and he had one more procedure at the hospital in Matsu Regional, which is sort of in between Palmer and Wasilla on the way to Anchorage. He had to go in and get the last of the buckshot taken out of his stump, because his prosthetic that he had was giving him a lot of pain. Because it was rubbing up against the buckshot in his arm, right? So he didn't want to lose that lifestyle living out here, and since he was a real diehard SOB, he went through and put eye bolts in machinery such as like chainsaws, and he did the work in order for him to utilize his hook hand, and he made this blunt hook. Kind of like this. I got to be careful how I position my fingers so I'm not flipping off the camera. Anyway, so he had this prosthetic, and I'm gonna go get this prosthetic here. Rob found part of Jim's prosthetic arms, and this is one right here. I believe this was the prototype. I know I've seen this. Jim had showed me how he had that done, and this went over his stump. Obviously, he had some sort of like a sock or something that went over his stump, and no, I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, and so that's just for illustrative purposes. So he would put this on like so, and then he had various harnesses and straps that went around his shoulder, and that's how he was able to keep that prosthetic on his stump arm. And that's, obviously you can see here at the end, that's where you would have the hook and what have you. So this isn't the prosthetic. Like I said, I believe this is a prototype, and he had a few different others. And I know that he was trying to build another kind of prosthetic arm that had the pinchers, that you've seen, and not really sure if he ever managed to get that done, but he did have a couple different hooks. So this is a genuine prosthetic here of Jim James, a little piece of history, if you will. So we'll put that back over here. So that's how Jim would work around here, was a prosthetic and hooks and everything. So at the time, Jim had another cabin that he was working on, and I'm not sure if it appeared on Rare Alaska, but there's a lower cabin. Rob and Sarah, they do talk about the cabin. It's owned by another gentleman now. So when I came up in 2011, there was some projects left in that cabin that he needed help with. It was almost done. He still needed some paneling made, and there was some other work that needed to be done in order to complete it. And it was he had said it was for his daughter. I've heard a few other tales that it may not have been, or it was for somebody else. I'm not sure, but he had said that it was built for his daughter. Now, he made all the lumber out here, besides plywood and some of the stuff that you need to go to town and get brought up here. But all the trim in this cabin was all birch that he milled with his mill. He made his own lumber here for the most part, right? And he also would mill out spruce for beams and what have you. So there was some finish work that needed to be done. Now, Jim would source his lumber all around the region. And Jim just didn't go out like a mile or so away from the main compound. He would actually go way, way, way out into the wilderness to find the perfect tree for whatever project that he was working on, right? So how do you haul logs out here? Well, he had a method of hauling logs, and everyone does things a little bit different. What his method was, if you are familiar with logging trucks where they have like a almost like a set of dolly, a dolly on the rear, or a set of axles. I say dolly, but you got your axles and you have a tow bar of sorts that connects to the truck, and then you have these bunks. And in some cases, the log trucks have a boom, or they have some sort of grapple, and they can pick up the logs and what have you. So he devised something similar called a Go Devil. What a Go Devil was, it was two sets of skis from a snow machine And by the way, he used to have a lot of snow machines here. Some ran and some didn't. Over the years, they would just die and get worn out, and they would get retired. And you don't throw things out, especially out here in the woods, because you may need it. Whatever it is that you may need, and in this case, he pulled the skis off of a couple of dead snow machines, and he made this Go Devil, the same principle as a logging truck. You had one set of skis, had a tow bar that would hook up to the snow machine. Then he had a bar that connected to the rear set of skis. It had a square tubing that went across the top of the skis, and there were hook points, like shackle ends or what have you. Anyway, there were hooking points, and what you would do is you would cut your tree down. After you limbed it and you got it prepped, he used this door jamb. It was a door jamb that had a little bit of cable that connected at the top and made a bipod. And off that bipod, you would have a come along. And that come along would connect to a chain that was wrapped around the tree. And you would winch up one end of the tree, and you would put the front of the Go Devil underneath. And you did not unhook the front set of skis off of your snow machine. So you had to position it in such a way where you can put the front of the Go Devil underneath, and you would set the tree down on that, strap it with the ratchet strap to the Go Devil, the front of the front set of skis. You would move the bipod to the rear, and you would do the same thing. Pick it up, set it down on the skis, strap it on, and then you would also strap your tow bar. Because I do remember that tow bar, even though you could disconnect it from both sets of skis, you really didn't want to, because you would run the risk of losing the bar. So you kept the bar on there and you ran another strap on there. And this was a way where you can haul various different lengths of logs, whether it be 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. I think he said that the longest tree haul was, I think, like 50 feet. I think somewhere thereabouts. Now, up in this area, you have different growth than you would say in Talkeetna, meaning it's old growth. And there used to be areas where you would find really, really, really tall spruce trees, really tall white spruce trees. And there's various different types of spruce trees in Alaska. I won't get too in depth on that, but you have Sitka spruce, black spruce, white spruce, blue spruce. Anyway, there's white spruce predominantly in this area. So he knew where to find really, really, really tall spruce trees. And we're talking well over 100 feet tall, which, yes, there are trees that are that tall in Alaska. You're just not going to see them everywhere. And unfortunately, in the last few years, the spruce bark beetle, has come through and has decimated the spruce tree population in various points in Alaska. And what happens is the spruce beetle comes in, and their larva, as the larva is growing, they actually are just underneath the bark in the first layer of skin, if you will, of the tree, and they gnaw, and they make all kinds of little trenches and all that good stuff. And as they're eating, you'll see the tree essentially bleeding out, meaning there's sap that's pouring out, because there's all these little holes all over, riddled with the spruce tree with all these holes. And so you can have a healthy spruce tree, an older spruce tree, and we're talking, spruce trees can take 100, 200, 300 years to grow into a really, really big tree. And by the time they're getting mature, they're not as resilient to the spruce beetle, say, compared to a younger spruce tree, where the spruce tree is like that big around, And so a lot of the older spruce trees in the area, they're dead standing, right? And after a while, they rot and then they fall down, or they're standing and the carpenter ants come in behind the spruce beetles and they finish off the tree and basically hollow it out to a certain point and make it paper thin, and then that rots and the tree falls over, and it's all over Alaska, and it's actually fairly sad. It's pretty sad to see all these trees dying off, but it's something that happens. So back then there was a lot of trees that were still alive, a lot of spruce trees that were still alive, and he would go cut down spruce trees and mill them up into either beams or other sorts of lumber. The birch you don't really use for anything building wise because it's prone to rot. You could seal it and what have you, but really most people, if you're going to build with logs, spruce, because spruce is straight, spruce is easy to work with, and it makes good structures with it. So he would use spruce for making beams and buildings and what have you. So that's why he would go cut down the really big spruce trees, because you would have to make like 6x6s or 8x8s, big beams we're talking about. And he would mill them out and make beams with them. And birch he would use to make paneling or trim or anything like that. And so the lower cabin, a lot of it was built using this kind of work, this kind of method. Not to say that there isn't any plywood or any regular pine stick frame. There is, but a lot of it is sourced from out here, right? And so I helped haul various logs down from the mountains to the lower cabin. Now, I mentioned Jim had a temper, and Jim had a way of sometimes making you feel um, scared, maybe, if you will, or at least concerned, because he could get very, very angry. Um, I don't want to say violent, but he could get very, very angry at times. And over the years, there have been people where he butted up heads with, and people would have to walk away, or they never came back. Jim had a way of running people out and running people so they didn't want to come back here and access other cabins or live out here or whatever. This was Jim's domain. Jim lived out here, and he really didn't want anybody else ruining his lifestyle or encroaching on his lifestyle, if you will. So anyway, with his temper, if something didn't go his way or something broke or there was something dumb, he would let you know that he was angry about it. And the day prior to this one trip, we had this Echo chainsaw, and something happened, and the chainsaw, the brake broke on me. And a brake on a chainsaw, if you're not familiar with it, you're holding your chainsaw like this, and you have your hand on the handle, and you have to hold your hand on it properly. And if something happens and it kicks back, it's designed to where your hand hits this brake and stops the chain from it hitting your face or any sort of appendages. Well, that brake somehow, I don't know what happened. Remember, it was a long time ago. Something happened, and it just fell apart and broke. Not really sure what caused that. Even to this day, I don't know. I know that a lot of his saws were old, but still, it was my responsibility since I had it in my hand and it broke. Anyway, he wasn't really too happy with me. So this next day we went and we were hauling large logs back to the lower cabin. I think we did 5 or 6 trips. I don't really remember how many. And it wasn't just one tree. There was a few other trees that we were working with and bringing down for him to process. I never helped him actually mill anything out. I brought everything down to the site for him to mill. And this one day, as mentioned, he wasn't too happy with me. We loaded up this, I think it was a 30-foot log, diameter. I'm sure it wasn't quite that big around, but it was close to this diameter, and it was, he said, about 5,000 pounds of weight behind the snow machine. And also his snow machines that he was running back then were Skidoo Tundra 2s. Those are 250cc engines with one cylinder. And he knew how to work those machines to their absolute max. If you think you could run a machine, this particular machine, to its max, Jim could take it up a couple notches. So anyway, we were running the ridges and starting to make our way down the mountains to get on the actual trail to the lower cabin where we were dumping the logs off. And Jim didn't really like to take the same trail twice in some of these areas. For whatever reason, I don't know, maybe for privacy reasons, meaning, you know, people flying over, people that might be overland on snow machines, whatever the case is, they're not taking an established trail. Not really sure. I think that was kind of the method of his madness on that. So we get to this one point, and he said, "Hope you can follow and keep up." And we get to this point, he makes this right, and he goes down the hill, and he's standing on a snow machine with this hook in the handlebar, and he is just jumping down, and he's just going downhill really, really, really fast. And at that point, when I made the right and I was going down, I didn't realize until I was already going down, uh-oh, this is going to be scary. Because it was a pretty good drop like this with lots of trees and other obstacles in the way. So as we're going down this mountainside, I have this 5,000-pound log, 30-foot log behind me on the Go Devil, and the straps were starting to kind of work their way loose. Usually you stop in every so often and you check your straps because they do stretch out and make sure that everything's all good. I wasn't able to do that. And you can't stop. It's better to not stop, because even if you did try to stop, now you have all this momentum of your log, and your log could slide forward and break loose and smack you and kill you. Not just hurt you, but kill you. So we're running down the trail, or the trail that he's making. I'm trying to maneuver my way around all these trees and some of these boulders, and he whips around and makes like this S turn, and I come down and I make this S turn, and there's this spruce tree with branches hanging down low, which would be in the summertime, would probably be up here past my head, and I'm 6 feet tall. So this could be up taller than me, but because of the snowpack, it's going to be down level here. And what happened, I came around this curve, and all of a sudden there's this branch that's pointed at me, and I smash through the windshield, and it comes right at my neck, and I barely had enough time to move this hand and move it out of the way, hit this branch away, and as it smashed through the windshield and I hit it like this, it grazed my neck right here, and it hurt, and it cut me open, and I was bleeding. I wasn't bleeding profusely, but I did have cut skin, and it hurt, and I was bleeding enough where you could do this and you had blood on your hand. And if I had not whacked that branch away in that split second, I probably would not be here telling you this story, or I may not be able to talk. Either way, I would have been a lot more injured than I was. And I couldn't stop because of all the weight pushing me down on the snow machine behind me, pushing me down, and I'm smashing through. And I get down to the bottom, and I get to the lower cabin where Jim was waiting, and he wasn't too happy that his windshield was busted. He was more concerned about his windshield than he was about my safety, but that was Jim. And like I said, he wasn't too happy with me with my chainsaw, so I think he just wasn't thinking about that. And I don't hold ill will on that. It's just a story. It's just something that happened to me, an experience that I'll never forget. So I will say that sometimes I can say, you know, Jim tried to kill me. He almost killed me with that. Whether he really had intentions on that, I'm going to say no. And again, that was just an experience. That was just a story there that that happened there with the branch getting me there. So got back to the cabin and I patched myself up and went on the rest of my trip. And that was in the second week of me being here. The first week was firewood and hauling the fuel and doing some other odds and ends for Jim. And then the second week was hauling a lot of logs and doing a little bit more firewood and various other tasks. Now, up here where Jim and Nancy lived, they weren't the only ones that lived here. There are some other neighbors, relatively speaking, close. And when I say close, they're still, several miles away from here. And years prior to Jim and Nancy coming out here, there had been other people that lived up here and had other cabins. Now, in Alaska, there are tons and tons and tons. There are hundreds of abandoned cabins all throughout the state. And each one has a story, whether somebody passed away or the family moved away and they couldn't live there anymore, or, there's so many things, so many factors to going into why a place is abandoned. The property may still be owned by somebody, but they haven't been out for many, many years. And the same goes for around here. Now, when I first came out here, or I should say in 2011, when I came out here, there were still a lot of cabins, abandoned cabins that were still standing. And Jim had a habit of finding some of these abandoned cabins and turning them into caches. Now, an abandoned cabin could be in any sort of state of decay, from falling in to just having some problems. And the main thing that kills a cabin is rot. What causes rot? Well, most cabins have wood stoves, and they have the stack that goes through the roof. If you don't shovel your roof off, depending on what kind of roof you have, you can have snow that comes down, whether it be a metal roof or a shingle roof. Snow is going to move because of gravity. And sometimes, well, really not sometimes, it's a matter of when, but your stovepipe's going to get knocked off and fall down. And when that happens, now your roof, the inside of your cabin, is exposed to the outside elements. And the water is coming down where the stove is, and then it starts to rot out the floor, and then it goes on and on and on from there. Your wall rots out, your floor rots out, and then eventually your cabin falls in. Another thing that causes a cabin to collapse is the fact that there's no one to clean off the snow, remove the snow. Shoveling roofs off in Alaska and really in northern climates, that's a real thing. Snow can get heavy as the year progresses with more snow load, more increase in depth. Also, if it warms up and starts to melt and everything packs down, it gets real heavy. It causes stress on the building, and after so many years, the timbers could crack and break, and the structure collapses. So Jim had several cabins around that he had caches in. In some cases, he had wood stoves in a couple. Another had a freezer. I think there was a couple of generators in another, and why he did that, I don't know, but that's just what he did. So towards the end of the second week came time to talk about my wages. And at the time, I was thinking I was going to get paid in cash, and that's what most people want when they go do work, right? Well, because they had purchased a whole lot of fuel, they were a little strapped for cash for a while. And so he said, well, how about I just, pay you in trade, so to speak, barter system. And so he said he had a chest freezer, a wood stove. He had a lot of guns, so there would be maybe a trade for some guns or anything like that. So as this progressed, we decided, well, let's go out and take a look at some of the other items that you have in these caches. In one place, the leaning cabin, and it's a cabin that, it was a nice cabin when I remember seeing it. It was a cabin that was built on stilts. and the stilts were spruce poles, uh, about this big in diameter, and there was several posts, and the cabin was built on top of that. When they built it, they put it up against a hill, and the hill is soft, meaning that it moves. And so over the years, with no maintenance, especially with no one living there, because it's technically an abandoned cabin, the ground was pushing up against the posts, and the posts, and then the cabin was starting to lean forward, and you could see the posts were leaning forward. And also because the logs were untreated, the posts were untreated, they were rotten at the bottom. So this cabin was not long for this world, or at least standing, right? And that's where he had a big chest freezer. So we go down to this cabin, and I think it was on a Thursday. I think it was on a Thursday. We went to this cabin and got this chest freezer and hauled it out to the railroad track, to the trailhead. And the cabin, at some point in time, somebody had gone in there and they put a series of turnbuckles and cables trying to stabilize the cabin. And I think when I was there, Jim had said it had been years and years since anybody had been to this cabin, which is normal for an abandoned cabin. No one's been there for years and years. It decays and then it falls over. Well, he was worried that the cabin was eventually going to fall, which it has, and it would crush the freezer. So went and I picked up this freezer, found out it was an inoperable freezer. So, okay. So I get this freezer and we bring it down to the track. The next thing was this wood stove, and I think it was a Nomad, either Nomad or Nordic wood stove. I think it was called a Nomad, and it was a very odd stove where it was fed in the side, and it was cylinder shaped, but yet it had a box in the front, but it also had glass, sliding glass, tempered glass for a wood stove. And yes, there are wood stoves that have glass. The stove over here has glass on it. There is wood stoves with glass, and its glass is made for high heat. Anyway, so he said this cabin is located way up on the ridge east of here. And when I say ridge, there's actually a lot of different ridges around here, but this one particular ridge had this little cabin up here. He said that's where the wood stove is. So we go up to this cabin way up, and it's almost on the top of this ridge. It is a little 12 by 16 cabin, and it had a dormer on one side. Now I remember the gal that had lived there and built the place. Her name was Michelle Tonsonet, and her girlfriend also had lived there as well. I don't remember her name. I do remember the name Michelle Tonsonet. So he said, we're going to Michelle Tonsonet's cabin, and that's where the stove is. So we go to this little cabin, and it's a cute little cabin. And even though it's dilapidated and abandoned, I still saw it could have potential. The bears have been inside there, Jim said. So it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be hard to open the door. Well, the cabin was kind of canted and kind of, not sitting level. And what happened was the foundation had been eaten away by porcupines. Porcupines love the glue in plywood and also into some lumbers. So what he said was porcupines had eaten away at the posts on the outer edges of the cabin, and it rotted, and the cabin eventually fell down. And there was a center post or something underneath the middle of this little cabin, and it created this huge hump, this huge bubble, if you will. And that hump extended all the way down to the door of the cabin, and it made it difficult to open. So with that, and also the bear damage inside and the trash in there, it was really hard to open up the door. So before I continue, kind of backtracking a little bit here. So I mentioned that, I like the railroad and all that good stuff. Well, when I was a little kid, there was a book at the library that I used to check out a lot, and it got me really interested in the Alaska Railroad. And it was called Alaska's Wilderness Rails, and it was written by Ken C. Brovald. It's a book that you can find online, eBay, or depending on where you are in your local library. Now, when I moved to the Talkeetna area, I had checked out that book for a long time, right? I knew that I wanted to obtain that book, and I have a small library of Alaska Railroad books as well as other railroad books written about Alaska in my collection. Back then, I really didn't have a whole lot of antique railroad items like I do today. So anyway, that book was, I think, pretty instrumental into getting me involved with the Alaska Railroad and its history, as well as other railroad history in general with Alaska. Um, so back to this cabin, with this little cabin, we went to go get the stove, and here I am busting the door, trying to kick it, trying to shove it open. I'm trying to just put all my weight in there, and I finally bust the door open. The door swings open, and I look and I see it's all trash. There's no furniture in there. The stove is long gone, so it's starting to decay over on one corner. There's trash, stuff that's been left for years and years and years. And we're talking this house hadn't been occupied for, at that point, at least 20 years, if not longer. Okay, so I step in and I look down on the floor, and this book was on the floor of this cabin. And what you're looking at here, not only is it my first book in my railroad collection, but this is the book that I used to check out. Well, not the exact book, but this is the book that I would check out at the library. What you're seeing here is the exact book that I found on the floor in this abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. In here is a little note to a gal named Helen. And I'm not sure if that was Michelle Tonsonet's girlfriend or who Helen was, but it says, Helen, thanks for picking up after the bear. Who needs children? Love, Susan. 882. It's also signed by Kim Brovald himself. It's a first edition book. This book was published in 1982. So this was a new book when this lady, Susan, picked it up and gifted it to Helen. And as to my understanding, there was a couple of cabin sitters, if you will, and quite possibly what happened was somebody was house or cabin sitting, and while they were doing it, a bear came in and just wrecked the inside of the cabin, and this was some sort of gift for helping clean up or what have you for the mess, which that clearly says there in the inscription. So it's pretty cool finding this book out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, pretty much. We got the wood stove and got it down to the railroad track. And then later on, there was some other items that Jim paid me with. There was a couple of firearms. One was a 7mm rifle, bolt action rifle. The other was a Model 62 Marlin 22 rifle. The 7mm was used to pay a debt, and the 22 I still have. And the 22 is interesting because the person that Jim got it from decided to cut the stock down, the butt of the rifle, because it was originally intended for this gentleman's daughter. Well, not long after he cut the stock down, the butt down, Marlin came out with a kid's 22, so a scaled down 22 for children. Somehow Jim got a hold of it and he tried to fix the stock. He never finished. So I wound up with this particular rifle, which I still have to this day, and I have not fixed the stock. I have found an exact replacement stock, and there was a certain medallion for sportsmanship that's on the stock. Like I said, I have found an exact duplicate with that same medallion. And so one of these years, I'm going to actually put a new stock on there. I'm going to keep the old stock and probably repair it and finish the work. And one of these years, that will be gifted to one of my children. So I have kept that. Now, the stove and the freezer we're going to have to be put on the tundra truck and hauled to Talkeetna. And Jim had said, well, load it up. We'll get it loaded up on the tundra truck, and if you call Anchorage and you call the customer service for the tundra truck and tell them who you're staying with and who you're working with, they'll give you a good deal, and you can go pick up your items at the depot in Talkeetna. When I got home and I did all that, I was not told the right information, and I would have to drive to Anchorage to go pick up these items. And unfortunately, at that time, I was not able to go to Anchorage to go pick up these items, so I was never able to have the freezer, the inoperable freezer, by the way, and this wood stove delivered and for me to go pick up. The freezer, I think, is still there at the trailhead, and the stove supposedly was left obviously too close to the track, and the snow fleet, which would be the big Jordan spreaders, came through and hit the stove and threw it into a creek that runs nearby Jim's old trailhead. And it's funny because as I've gotten to know Rob and Sarah and I've watched their videos, Rob has a video of him working on the new house. Jim and Nancy were having a new house built, and legend has it Discovery Channel had actually bought most of the building material for Jim because he was going to be building this house and it was going to be featured on the TV show. And just a disclaimer, I've not watched all of River Alaska. I've actually, while I've been here visiting Rob and Sarah, I watched 5 episodes, and that was the most I've ever watched of River Alaska. Only now am I watching the series, and the reason why is because it is so poorly edited. It's not really told right. There's a lot of fakeness, and you have to realize it is a reality TV show. So there's stuff that's made for TV. Well, there's a lot of fakeness on there, especially with the railroad operations. I couldn't get into it. Just not my thing. So I don't know if the new house was featured on Railroad Alaska. I think Rob said it was, but I don't remember. But I digress. So anyway, in one of these videos that Rob did, an early video of him working on the new house, I saw this stove that was sitting there in the kitchen area, and it matched. It looked just like the one that Jim was trying to get me to take. And on one of Rob and Sarah's lives, and by the way, every Monday they do a live show on YouTube on their channel, and it's at 4 p.m. Alaska Standard Time. So if you want, go ahead and check out, and they'd be more than happy to answer your questions in the chat. That's what they do. We all get on there. I'm on there sometimes. There's other folks with YouTube channels that come on there, and regular folks in general will come on, and they're more than willing to talk to you about how they live out here and answer questions about Jim and Nancy's old place. So anyway, as we're on the live, I asked him where he got that stove from, And it turns out it is the same stove that Jim had tried to get me to take. Um, it may actually have not been left down there at the track very long, and it may not have been dumped into the creek after all. I don't know. Jim had a way of taking items and utilizing it for his own purposes, and if stuff was left for too long, well, hey, it's his, and that's just how Jim was. So after after everything was brought down to the track, Sunday came along, and I got on the train and I went home. I did take the stove glass with me from this wood stove, and Rob knows that I have the glass, and eventually I'm gonna bring it back. All these years later, I still have the glass for this stove, right? So I'll bring the glass up to Rob, and maybe you'll use the wood stove somewhere else. I don't know. The glass that's in there didn't fit, so it had problems sucking in air and all this good stuff. So anyway, so that Sunday came, and I got on the train, and I got back to my cabin that I used to live at in Answer Creek in Talkeetna. And the next time I came up was, I believe, April 7th, 2011. It would have been the first Thursday of the month. I'm pretty sure it was April 7th because it would have been the day before my birthday. And I came out here, and Jim wanted to pay me more, and there was other items that he wanted to give me as payment for all the work that I did. And I think they were all like LED lights and cell phone microphones that he was trying to put together for some sort of lighting system. And I don't remember what all it was, but it was stuff. It was a lot of stuff. And I ended up taking some of the stuff back with me, and I checked on the stove. The stove was still there at that period of time, as well as the freezer. And I think there was something else too that he handed off to me. I don't remember. Like I said, it was a long time ago. Now, I wasn't too happy with how I was paid, because at that time I could have used the cash a lot more for paying my bills and doing what I needed to do in my life. But I figured, well, I guess I could take the items that he has given me as payment, and I can turn around and sell them for cash. In all reality, I only made $100 off of all this, because I owed a friend some money for a vehicle that I had purchased, so I just gave them the 1.7 millimeter. And I did get paid some cash. Don't get me wrong. It's not like he never not paid me. Such as the first time I came out here, I did get paid in cash. The second time, which would have been the 1 week period, I think in February 2011, I did get some cash for that. But when I came back and I did the third work session, if you will, the 2 week period, that's when I did the absolute most work. Um, and I didn't get compensated. Now, and I don't hold a grudge about that now. It's just, how it was. It's part of the story. It's part of my legend that I'm telling you, and that's just how it was, and it's okay. I still have, like this book, for instance. Really, really, I guess you could say, really made the trip. Love that. I have that book. And then I have the 22, and of course I have the memory. I have the memories of coming out here and working for Jim and Nancy. So that was pretty much it. And then when I worked for the railroad when I started working for the railroad in 2014 as a Gandy dancer, and a Gandy dancer is a maintenance away person, somebody that's spiking down track, working on track maintenance. When I started doing that, I actually held a Talkeetna section for most of that summer. This one particular day, my foreman and myself were in the work truck high railing down the track towards Talkeetna, and it was on a Friday. And we didn't have a whole lot of work left, but we had a couple hours of time, and so we were taking our time to get back into Talkeetna, and we stopped at Jim's trailhead because Jim actually happened to be outside doing some maintenance on his trail, and we all were talking. And then Jim asked me, because he realized I was sitting in the passenger seat, he said, "Hey, you never got your stove or your freezer? The Wing Warriors," and he's referring to the Jordan Spreaders, dumped your stove into the creek. And I said, "Well, this is what happened where um, the customer service down there in Anchorage said I had to pay X amount of money and I had to get everything weighed because in order to properly charge you, they have to weigh the items that they bring in. And then, they charge you and you pay them and you get your items and then you go back." And I told him, I said, at that time, I just couldn't afford doing it. And that's just how it is. And he said, "Oh, well, I can't remember what all was said, but that's just kind of what the story was." And I was still a little salty towards Jim about all the kind of the events that happened. Um, but it is what it is. And that was the last time I talked to Jim James personally. Nancy, however, I had seen quite a few times after that. Nancy is a real sweetheart. She's a really nice lady, and I would talk to her whenever I'd see her at the at the train station or on the train. Jim passed away, I believe, in 2017 due to lung cancer. I don't think he ever did anything. I don't think he ever sought any treatment. I think he may have been too far along. So he just lived his life and he passed away out here in the woods at his home. So that's kind of my story with Jim and Nancy. And I could sit here and probably think of more little stories about Jim and Nancy. Well, I'll tell you this. So Jim was a tinkerer kind of guy. Jim was a master mechanic, and his specialty was foreign cars. He loved foreign cars. He loved Peugeot, Renault, anything European. He loved. I'm not sure what his feelings were on Asian cars. I can't remember if he liked them or not. I know that later on they owned a Subaru, and Subaru is a pretty good car. I will say Subaru is a pretty good car. I'm more of a General Motors. I like my Chevrolet and GMC square bodies and what have you. That's what I have. That's what I drive mainly. So anyway, he was a master mechanic, and he did tell me stories on working. He had his own shops. He had his own businesses throughout the years, and so he talked about having his own businesses throughout the country. He talked about his stories working in the United States Air Force. He was in the service. And then he talked about how he came to Alaska. Him and Nancy came to Alaska. They had I can't remember if I want to say that they lived in Southeast Alaska for a short bit. And then they lived in Wasilla. They lived in Wasilla, kind of near IHOP in Wasilla on that side of town. There used to be an auto shop over there, and he owned that business and lived there in his business for several years. But by the time that they moved up this way, or I should say to the Wasilla area, I think it was probably the late 1980s or mid to late 1980s, Wasilla was already too populated for them. And so they figured about moving further north. And so they moved to Talkeetna, and he had a business. He had his mechanic business in Talkeetna. He built a house in East Talkeetna, and East Talkeetna is the residential part of Talkeetna, the actual core town, the village itself. And East Talkeetna is across the railroad track. So when you're on the railroad and let's say you're going north, East Talkeetna is obviously in east side, right? So he built a home over there. He had an auto shop there for several years, and Talkeetna was getting pretty populated for him even still. And somehow they found the property north of Chase, and he and Nancy decided to purchase it and build their home. And for a couple of years, they traveled back and forth between this home and their Talkeetna home. And once they were able to live out here, it was livable enough. They moved out here and they sold their Talkeetna home. The Talkeetna home still exists. I won't divulge where, as for privacy purposes for the people that live there, but the home still exists. And if you ever seen Jim and Nancy's cabin, the original cabin, you can see uh, the style of his build, and the home in East Talkeetna kind of has the same flavor. And I do drive by it periodically when I'm in there, East Talkeetna, for whatever reason, and I know that that's Jim and Nancy's old place. So that's pretty much, like I said, that's pretty much my story with Jim and Nancy. I probably will be doing more videos um, revolving around Jim and Nancy. Now that I'm going to be back up here visiting Rob and Sarah here at Curmudge Inn periodically, and I know that we'll be doing more lives. We'll be doing more episodes and shows about my experiences with Jim and Nancy here with Rob and Sarah. And I'll be doing more videos here and telling you some more of my experiences with Jim and Nancy. So we're going to move on a little bit to the railroad here, and then we'll conclude the story time. So with the railroad, as I mentioned, with the flag stop service, you come to Talkeetna, and you get on the local train, which is the Hurricane Turn, and you would go to wherever your stop is, and you get dropped off, and you go to your home. How do you get your trash out of here? That's a question that I've been asked about. Well, for the most case, you don't take your trash out. You're not wasteful out here in the woods. You utilize everything. Is there trash out here? Yeah, there's trash out here, but it's expensive. It's too expensive to get rid of. So a lot of people will process their trash, and there's really not anything left. You're able to burn all your burnables, what we call burnables, and that would be your paper products and what have you. People will utilize tin cans, and they'll make things with tin cans, whether it would be hardware containers. Some people actually will go far in depth as to cut the bottom ends of cans, and they'll make a metal roof with tin cans, right? So back when I first came to the area and I got to know the off-gridders that you would see on Railroad Alaska, most of them are not the same off-gridders that I knew. It seems like every so many years, things change, people move on, and people change, and that's just what happens. So there's several people that were on Railroad Alaska that were new to the area, and the trains are different too. The original Hurricane Turn consisted of a pair of RDCs. Bud RDCs. A Bud RDC is a rail diesel car. It's a self-propelled passenger car with an engineer's cab on either end, and consists of two diesel engines connected to a transmission. It's similar to a truck, where you have the engine and the transmission and a drive shaft, and then you have a final drive or a differential, and that's what made the cars self-propelled. Alaska Railroad had four of them: 701, 702, 711, and 712. And they were used on the Hurricane Turn for many, many, many years. And that was a different experience, more than anyone will know, because back then you were able to stand in the engineer's cab, if you will, and talk to the engineer the whole time. And I've gotten to know a few engineers over the years that way, just riding along. I would ride the Hurricane Turn whenever I could, and I would stand next to the engineer the whole time, and I would have a straight on view all the way up and back. I got to know the off-gridders that way too, and I would go help out. It's just something that I did. I would go help out loading the off-gridder stuff or offloading, and that was another way how I got to know the off-gridders in the area, was by helping them on and off the train. So the Hurricane Turn was not like a tourist train at all. Nowadays, you can it's like a tourist train in a way. It still has the same spirit of what it is, the off-gridders train, like a taxi, right? But there are people that do ride it for the experience. Um, and you have a dome car, you do have a coach. It's nice, but it's not like what I was used to as a kid. And unfortunately, like my wife and my kids won't experience that. They've experienced a hurricane turn, but not like what I remembered. And that's just how the times changed. In 2009, the hurricane turn was turned into an actual train. The RDCs were retired, and some of them were sold off. 701 actually was recently sold, I think about a year ago, to Mary Kroll of Soldotna. And Mary Kroll has Whistle Hill and Brew 602. She purchased an old bi-level car from the railroad when they retired the 600 series cars, and there was three of them. She bought one, turned into a coffee shop. She has a little restaurant on property as well. She has the remains, the car body remains of locomotive 1514, an FP7, and then she recently purchased RDC 701. So she has a piece of the hurricane turn. I have yet to go down and visit her and her business since she's got the 701. So I'm going to make an appointment going down there hopefully this summer and go dip netting and go by and say hi, and I'll hopefully be able to do a video of that compound as well. So I believe we're going to conclude story time here, and I do appreciate you watching. And if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments. Be sure to check out my friends Rob and Sarah's YouTube channel, Curmudge Inn Alaska. And again, that's their logo that they use. And I appreciate you hanging out and listening to story time. Thank you so much, and we'll see you around the bend.